happen in organizations by people with very little lean training. And just, telling them about waste and here's where you find it and let's go get it.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, and that's sort of where I was going to go with this today. Is just keeping it simple, because I sort of got my lean start in the U.S. Army, and then went into blue chip pharma into lean, and a lot of times you've got this it's overly structured. There's too many steps, and it's too complicated, right? And even you said, okay, we got to read all these books and consume all this information. You have GE's way of doing lean, where kind of it originated with maybe GE and Toyota, but you have everybody's different flavor of it. And like you said, it's really all about finding waste. And I think even more of the core principle when I advise clients is lean is about what is valuable to the customer. It's about customer and value. And that is the framework and the paradigm that you need to be thinking in. It's really that simple. It doesn't need a 15-step tool. It doesn't need these complicated books and things. What does your customer value? And if you understand that and then can look at your operations and what you do, then you'll be able to find, and really it's synonymous with what you said. Where is their waste? Where are we doing things that our customers don't need and don't care about? Customers really don't care about much of what we do. They really only care about the specific things that get them that widget or service at the end. So, again, I try to keep it simple with clients and with people. It's about customers, it's about value, it's about getting rid of waste. And, I go back to the acronym TIMWOOD, just because
Okay.
that's how I was
Yep.
taught, and it's
Yep.
easy to remember. Transportation, inventory, motion or movement, waiting, over processing, overproduction, defects. And the one I like that's come up sort of recently is underutilized talent. So it doesn't fit in Tim Wood somewhere, but again, it's something that you can put in there. But it's really as simple as driving that out of
Yeah.
your business and thinking about instead of, and again, it goes back to this push versus pull mentality, right? Where in a push mentality, we're trying to predict, we're trying to think, we're trying to guess what we think our customers need, what we think the demand is, and all these things. Instead of a pull, what actually do they need? We get them what they need when they want it, without waste. And it's really just that simple. I've read about almost every lean book you can imagine, and they're all good, but the more you read, I think the more it can confuse you.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just keeping it simple. So
Yeah, I remember we used to sit and have like debates over like what's value added versus non-value added waste. And honestly, at the end of the day, if you see it because you sort of called it out, in the acronym that you just used, right, with Tim Wood, um, that I mean, I feel like the minute that you hear it and the minute you start to talk about each one of the elements, right, is transportation, car transportation only, or is it people movement, or is it, paper moving around an office? There's a lot of different ways you can examine just that one element. And who really cares if you can say whether or not if it's value added or non-value added? It might matter whenever it comes back to the definition that you just gave in terms of the customer. Does the customer at the end of the day really value that thing or not? And so to me, it's you can get so far and so deep into the woods that you just essentially have gotten to the point where you're just talking about things that at the end of the day don't matter, because you're just not going to examine where you're going to go or what you need to do to be able to do this. And I feel like in our conversation we'll be able to break down one a little bit more of like the some of the elements of lean that people should take away, but also some of the elements in terms of tools that people could consider as well, because I think both become valuable at times. But I also I would tell anybody that's getting started, look, if you understand the seven ways, or eight to your point. I mean, there's debate about
I mean,
seven
yeah,
or eight
we'll
anyway.
stick
So
with Tim Wood just to make it simple. I'm
yeah,
already overcomplicating it.
Yeah. So if you have 7 wastes and then you move from 7 waste to, okay, so how do you look at a process and pick any process inside of a company? I mean, what's funny to me is whenever I talk to executives anymore, they want to like let's go examine the whole organization wing to wing from the minute that we get an order to the raw material out the door or product out the door. And that's fine, but honestly, if you could just say, hey, look, my biggest problem is in shipping and delivery, spend all your time there. I mean, who cares? I mean, honestly, if that's 90% of what the client sees and that's their biggest frustration, then then start there. I mean, I think again, you can overcomplicate this thing. If you start to say, hey, look, I'm gonna widen my scope to every single thing inside of my organization because we have waste everywhere. You do, but I mean, is that where you're seeing the problems? Is that where your clients are seeing the problem?
Yeah, no, I agree, and in the way I sort of advise clients when I talk to these executives who want to get the big picture in. So if you want to do a value stream map on your entire business, that's fine if you really don't have a good feel of where your waste is. But 98% of the time, these executives do. They're in this business all day. They know where the pain points are. They know it's in shipping and delivery, or they know it's in the commercial lead to cash cycle or something like that. They understand where it is. So it's really about then what do you do? So instead of having all of these complex frameworks as far as, hey, you have to follow this process or this, it's you already probably know where all these wastes are. Tell me what part of the business hurts. And then the first thing we do, the first thing I try to advise clients is like, let's gemba it. Let's just go see it. If you know that it's there, and you know that it's painful, let's verify, let's get in a plane, let's get in a car, let's go see it. Let's get eyes on it. Let's get eyes on the people. Let's talk about it. And let's understand really what's going on. Because that's actually going to give you half of the information you need to start driving it out. It's just literally putting eyes on it. I've seen executives complain about functions in their business and being wasteful or the cost is too high and things like that, and they have not got on a plane. They haven't
Yeah.
gotten in a car. They haven't talked to the people on the floor. So,
Yeah.
as far as keeping it simple, they know where the problems are. Let's go. Let's start investigating that way. We don't need to do a big value stream mapping exercise and bring in every executive to tell us what we already know is that we have a problem in shipping and receiving. Let's just start going there and investigating it and seeing, which of the 7 wastes are there and what modalities are they manifesting themselves. And then, oftentimes just talking to the people around that process, they have the answers. So you don't
Yeah.
need to go through a lot of these tools and arduous things. They oftentimes have those quick wins or low hanging fruit. So again, I like to keep it simple. But what do you see, Don? I mean, how do you approach it?
Yeah, no, the only thing I was going to add to what you were saying is I also would say, so if you're going to value stream map it, it needs to be done with, subject matter experts that know what happened, right? So you don't pick the manager. It's not the senior executive. It's the person that does the work, right? So whoever that person is, that's a subject matter expert's the person that needs to be in the value stream mapping, session overall. And I've seen this mistake too many times, and I've also seen where managers are invited, the subject matter expert says the way it is, the manager says no, the subject matter expert says the way it is, the manager says no. They try and do this filtering, and that filtering is what causes your problem. That's why issues reoccur. If you're going to the customer to go look, or you're going to the shipping dock to go look, it's to go look at the shipping dock. It's not to go to a meeting room that's near shipping, and it's also
Yep.
not to go to a meeting room that's at the customer. And so it was funny because when I did this for one of the organizations that I was in, we were actually doing equipment delivery, right? So we were at the point where we wanted to look at, okay, so what does it look like from the customer's eyes at receiving? And I remember I brought a GoPro that sat on the boxes. That essentially every single time that boxes were delivered, we sat the GoPro down, and the GoPro went down the hallways with each one of the boxes to go trace this path. And at the end of the day, we had like this large spaghetti diagram that showed all the confusion around where these boxes were going. And we had an actual trace in video of every single path that every single box took inside the organization. And it just showed the mass chaos from the customer side. It's like, look, I mean, they're receiving, you know, 200 to 300, boxes, depending on, roughly the size of the order. And most customers don't have the room or space to store all these in one location. So what do? They put them wherever they can. And that wherever they can order just winds up not working for us. Well, I mean, then maybe we have to think about how does the truck get packed so that it arrives in an order that we need. And then that way, whenever we get the boxes, they'll just instantly be in that order. Or how do we label them or use some form of visual management? And to me, that's where, tools like this and sitting in a meeting room and talking about it doesn't help. And it just, you got to get out there and go see.
No, 100% agree, and I won't go long on this, but sort of a similar case in which I think was a buffer prep area, and in talking with the managers, they had all the answers about what was wrong. I said, "Well, let's film it. Let's film it and build a spaghetti diagram and see." And we filmed it, and the manager's jaw dropped after we had actually reviewed the film, built the spaghetti diagram, and showed the paths that these associates and manufacturing associates were taking in order to get tools, to get them cleaned, and then to put the dirty ones away, to get everything prepped. It was so inefficient, and in certain respects dangerous in
Mm.
how they were using these cart elevators and things like that. And really it's not until you actually film and go see the subject matter experts on the floor and what they're doing, because oftentimes managers, they're doing the best they can, but sitting in a room with them and asking them, yeah, tell me what are the problems here? That's not a Gemba. You have to really go and see it and understand for yourself. It's really eye opening. So yeah, it's and again, as we come back to the same thing, is keeping lean simple, right?
Yeah.
It's certain things like just going and seeing. Value stream mapping can be something that is valuable. Things like 5S can be something that's super valuable. That's simple, right? We don't have to overthink this. We already know that we have certain zones or certain areas that we can see with our eyes. They're chaos, right? They're not cleaned. Nothing is where it should be. Everybody's confused. There's no visual cues on where things should go. No reason to overthink it. We need a 5S here, and that's just dramatically going to help reduce some of this waste. We
Hey,
don't
Ron,
have to
can you
go and
touch on
model.
what 5S is just really quickly, just for anybody that doesn't know?
Yeah, it's basically just a technique where you sort, you set, you shine, you standardize, and sustain. So when you think about it, it's if anything is broken in a certain area, you want to make sure that it's fixed. You'd be surprised at how many areas in manufacturing or even back office type things where you have things that are broken. So you got to fix those things. Then you have to sort things. You have to get them where they need to be and set them where they need to be. You have to standardize how where things go and have visual cues as far as if you're in a manufacturing zone and all of your tools are maybe up on a wall, right? And it should be super clear the second you see it that a tool is missing, right? Rather than having all the tools maybe in a bin that you can't tell. And then you have some sort of sustainability to it. So you have some leader that has a leader standard work where they're coming by and they're checking off certain things to make sure that we're adhering to those principles. And really, a 5S is actually rooted in zoning. And that's another thing I try to tell clients is if you've got a manufacturing floor, even if you've got a back office area where you're doing services and things, it needs to be zoned where hey, this zone is where this takes place, and this person has responsibility. If you don't have it zoned and responsibility, you'll never be able to sustain what any 5S you put in place.
Yeah.
So it's really as simple as zoning, getting responsibility, cleaning it up, standardizing it, putting things where they need to be, and sustaining it. So very simple tool. I probably overcomplicated it, but that's how I think about it, Don.
No, it's. I mean, I just think it's important, and I've seen people try and carry this too far, right? So, I mean, my example is, let's say my desk. My desk is the place where I come to do my work every day, and um, I have certain things in certain places, for my desk. And I've seen leaders come through and say, "Hey, look, we're gonna 5S every desk inside of the office," right? Which, to me, in a way, makes sense, right? I mean, maybe you don't want a lot of clutter. Maybe you want to make sure that the work area is clear and things like that. It make that part make sense. I've seen this carried to the absolute extreme, though, where we will have tape on the desk where the stapler goes, and we'll have, a
Yeah,
place where the tape goes. And I mean, it's like, okay, well, I mean, as long as the individual that's there is efficiently working, I think you can carry this a bit too far, because, again, how much sort of time does somebody spend searching and looking for the right thing to be able to do when they're at their desk? For the most part, it's a different scenario, I feel like, than when you are somebody who's constantly manufacturing things and you're using a variety of tools and things are in and out all the time. Unlike, I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, my keyboard stays where my keyboard is. I don't need tape on my desk to tell me that
yeah.
my keyboard goes here. But I've seen it carried to that extreme before, and I feel like, again, it's one of the ways that the tools can just be misapplied. But I mean, I do think, and we've done this before, where hey, look, whenever you have an extremely large toolbox, with, who knows, maybe hundreds or possibly 1,000 tools in it, and every single time that you go to that toolbox, you spend time searching, and we could see that in time studies and in a spaghetti map. Um, Now all of a sudden, it's like this is a clear opportunity then to standardize that, the layout of the toolbox, so that the individual can immediately see, is the tool there, yes or no? And if not, then, maybe, who knows, it's still in the workspace or something else. So,
Yeah, no, 100%. And you make a good point because when I worked for GSK, GSK did a great job. So I'm not picking on them here, but they did a great job zoning all of the manufacturing areas, getting responsibility. But they mandated 5 S's in each zone. They didn't just zone manufacturing; they zoned like information in folders and things like that where people had responsibility. And in certain circumstances, a 5S made sense, right? Just like you said, there's a problem. We see waste. We see the benefit of a 5S here. But there were certain zones that didn't need a 5S. That wasn't their key problem. They had so many other problems. And, we were kind of mandated to spend our time putting in a 5S. And ultimately, from a lean perspective, and we can get into this later, lean a lot of times is about buy-in. You need to get people to buy into it and buy into the concept. And when you're pushing tools that are not providing benefit and aren't solving priority problems, you're going to lose buy-in. And that's sort of a case, that I found with some folks in GSK where, again, we were doing great things, but now we're forcing certain zones that they've got so many other problems. They don't need a 5S. They don't have. But again, we're taping this state, or we're drawing the outline to the whatever stapler on the desk, or something in an area, and it's actually, I remember going through that in buffer prep where, we're taking this too far. Where we actually went to the desk area and it's like, okay, where are these office supplies? Because people still have to do paperwork and things like that. It's like we're taking this too far now. We need to focus on the tools and the carts and the things like that where, the time is being spent. So, you know, um, yeah, 100%. It's got to solve a problem for us. And that's what a 5S is. It's a tool to help us get rid of waste and solve problems. And if we don't have waste and we don't have problems, no reason to do a 5S just to do it. So
right.
that's kind of my soapbox on that.
Yeah, and I feel like there are a lot of different tools in the lean tool set as well. But I also feel like between standard work, which essentially is just figuring out how do you standardize what people do, in a repeated fashion, um, up to 5S. I've spent the greater majority of time inside of organizations just focusing on those two things. And I know at GE, one specific part of the organization that we were really focusing in on, we had, I don't know, 278 Kaizen events, that we held in a very short period of time. And 98% of those were standard work. Okay, so we're going to focus on this one area of the organization. And when we leave here, the standard work will be in place. We'll have, ways to measure that and, continue to, move throughout the organization. And, occasionally we would have other, I feel like other opportunities where we come back and say, hey, look, we're going to work on 5S, or we're going to work on single piece flow, which is, much more, taking something from start to finish, with one individual. And yeah, so I mean, each one of those tools, I felt like, the team would oftentimes ask, so which one of the lean tools will we use in this? And it's like, look, it's standard work again, because until we get this down, the reality is there's no sense in working on anything else, and you can't, really start to focus in on some of the other opportunities until get standard work in place. So
Yeah, and I got a question, Don. Maybe you can help me with your experience, because this has been something that has always sort of been tough to articulate and get consensus when I talk to other lean leaders. But standard work versus SOPs. Um, so especially you and I have worked in a lot of regulated environments like life sciences, right, where SOPs are mandated. You have to have them. But it sort of became this thing as far as, okay, we're putting in standard works, but what's the difference between an SOP and standard work? If we find that we need to standardize something, do we reflect it in the SOP? What doesn't get reflected in the SOP? If we are going to put a standard work in place, are we just basically taking an important piece of that SOP and visualizing it and putting it in steps on a placard, so anybody, no matter who they are, if it's a new guy or gal, uh, they can walk right in and understand it even better than what's in the SOP? Are these in addition to an SOP? So you're not going to find it in there. It's just going one level deeper as far as, if it says, okay, take A to B, but a standard work will actually, in the SOP, it'll say take A to B, but a standard work might actually, show you, here's a picture of all of what you do in this specific area to take A to B. So it's more simple. And I've always kind of, not struggled, but I've had people challenge and say, well, we need to update the SOPs. And then some people say, we don't need to update the SOPs. We just need to expound on them in like a laminated thing at this station or something like that. So how do you how do you discern or decouple standard work from SOPs?
yeah, from an SOP and a standard work standpoint, I mean, where I sort of start, and I think we might have mentioned this in one of the other conversations that you and I had, but essentially where I start at both levels is an SOP in a regulated environment needs to call out the specific steps that should be executed to deliver whatever it is as a quality product, but also not at a level that it is so controlling and so detailed that nobody can follow it, right? So the example that I oftentimes use is a batter standing inside of a batter's box, right? So, you don't really control how the batter stands in the batter's box. You don't control how they're holding the bat. None of those things are the things that are more or less controlled. But what you're trying to sort of indicate is, hey, look, here's the way that, essentially this thing is done. at a level that, hopefully it's not going to get you, repeatedly dinged for the fact that, hey, instead of having a right-handed person doing it, you had a left-handed person doing it, and they didn't follow the steps 1, 2, 3, because that's just not naturally how they work. So, I mean, to go back to your question, when I'm typically working with teams on standard work, the first part is sort of looking at the process, right? The process part of it. And that's very SOP like to me. It's very, sort of, hey, look, you could say, this is step 1, 2, 3. But the second level of it is, okay, so are there ways to make sure that when Ron does it versus when Don does it, that there's no possible way that either of us could mess it up, right? And so you think about, let's just say, like, whenever you fill out a form online and they have those required fields in there, if you don't fill in the required fields, then you can't typically, get to the submit button or done button or whatever. And so, those are always the things that to me start to prove that, yes, we have standard work in place, because there are controls that prevent this from happening. If you don't do it the right way and I don't do it the right way, neither one of us could submit, whatever we want, and, get the work done. And unlike an SOP, which, is, very much the documented way of doing it, but inside of a regulated environment, I would also say, typically whenever I'm working with teams on SOPs, it's okay, so what do we specifically have to document to show that this thing is going to be delivered of quality? And nothing more. I don't want like every last detail. Move your mouse to the left, click on the,
Yeah.
no, I don't want that. Click on the first box. What goes in the first box? And so essentially, that's my differentiation for it. I think for between regulated departments and or regulated organizations and unregulated, this could vary a bit. But I also think that the the people that are saying, look, they have to go update the SOP. The key question for me again would be, if you're sort of controlling like the way that people are doing things and it's following that natural process, do you really have to update the SOP? I don't know. I would kind of, come back to that question of, if the process really didn't change, and all we're doing is we're saying, hey, look, when this person moves from step 1 to step 2, we're going to make sure that they can't go on into step 2, unless there's, some form of a control in place. And the way that you sort of start to visualize those things is by looking for opportunities to control it. And the one example I used to be able to use, I don't see it as much anymore, is in X-ray machines at the airport. They used to have this sort of shape that controlled like the amount of or the size of the thing that you would send through the X-ray machine. And if you had a suitcase that was too big, essentially it wouldn't fit. I mean, that was their pokeyoke or control
Yeah.
for being able to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's that really helps as far as me and how I think about it. I've always just tried to keep it, kind of simple like that. As far as the SOP is really about the process and about how you get to that quality product and what. It's more about the what needs to happen. And like you said, you don't have to get into the how unless you have to get into it. So if you're looking at a process and you see, okay, here's everything that needs to happen, it's what needs to happen. But we're finding that in step 3, how people do it is varying tremendously. And because of that, sometimes it's slower, sometimes it's faster. We're thinking that it's potentially affecting the end product. So going back to your batter's box example, what do you have to do to be in compliance? Well, you have to stand in the batter's box. You cannot stand outside the batter's box. But do you stand in the back of it? Do you stand in the front of it? Do you, how do you set yourself up in it to get the best hit that you can? All of those things is sort of the how, and that allows you to kind of get that repeatability, reproducibility, no matter who it is. That's going to do step 3, right? So and also I think a standard work is something that's a little bit more visual. So if I come to do this, there should be something here that shows me visually how this is done, with pictures, with that extra layer of detail. But like you said, we don't need to do this for everything, because there's certain things that, it's pretty simple. We don't need to get into that level of detail for an SOP. We don't even need to have a standard work for that. There's only certain things as far as the how goes that we think we need to put the standard work in place. But yeah, so I'm going to steal that batter's box example. I like that one.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have I mean, for people that have seen me do lean training, I mean, I actually have a slide that has a batter standing in a batter's box, just because, sometimes you have people from other countries or whatever, they may not actually understand the example. But at the same time, to me, it's a great visual to kind of indicate, hey, you know, this is how you should think about writing an SOP. Honestly, if you've gotten way too detailed and you show, let's say, keep your feet here and they can only be
Yeah.
in this position. Um, again, not all of us can all stand the same way very comfortably. And, sometimes it might actually hinder your performance. So, I would say the same thing whenever it comes to an SOP. You get way too detailed, all of a sudden, people are not following it. And in a regulated environment, it all of a sudden becomes an opportunity for a finding. And nobody wants more findings and more work to do in terms of investigating things. And then the fallback always becomes, well, we'll just train that person better to position their feet in the right spot every single time. And the answer really is no. No, we've just actually added a bit too much detail. We should sort of rewind the gauge here and take a look at how far we've swung the pendulum in terms of detail, and is it just too much?
Well, and that's why it's good to have the subject matter experts drive these things, because these are the people on the floor that are going to be doing them. These are the people on the floor that typically know what hurts and what needs to be done and where there's opportunity for improvement. I find that, if we let them drive the process, obviously managers are going to oversee, but if you have managers and directors and things like that, they just need to be trained better and things like that. We actually need to go to the floor and ask, right? Is have we over SOP'd this, right? Do we need to back off a little bit? Do we actually need standard work here? Do we actually need it over here? Again, I trust the subject matter experts on the floor. Certainly, there's a reason that managers, directors, VPs, executives are where they are, to provide that level of oversight, to provide leadership and resources and structure. But at the end of the day, whether you're implementing a 5S, a standard work, uh, you're gembang on the floor, you need to be interacting with those subject matter experts, or value stream mapping, right? They're going to be the ones that are going to help you, understand and make real change. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, I feel like it's um, you know, questioning where you're applying the tools is something I feel like is a valid conversation that should happen in every organization. Are we doing work here because we sort of said that we were going to do work here, or are we doing work here because this is the place that it needs it the most, right? And I mean, it kind of brings so you mentioned something a little bit ago that really sort of hits home for me as well. So I was working with an organization at the beginning of the year, and this organization had said, hey, look, here is the most critical area of the organization that we need to work on. We have a lot of different areas, but this is the most critical area. And so essentially we value stream mapped everything. We sort of took a look at everything and then went through this list of, here are all of the different things that we're going to go through and improve. And that organization then, as we started the process, came back and said, we know that we did all this other work, but now we actually think that we need to go somewhere else and go do the same thing. And I feel like, so there is a dilemma overall. And again, I would love your perspective on this also. So the dilemma is, okay, so you've already committed to this level of work inside of this portion of the organization to go fix it. Everybody that essentially did that initial value stream map has an initial commitment from the organization that, hey, look, we're going to look here, focus here, and go fix the things here. And now all of a sudden, because of, who knows, customer complaints or, whatever it might be, now all of a sudden, because of this is a small organization, they're saying, no, we're going to go focus in a completely different area and start all over again. Um, and as an outsider, the tough part for me, and this is more the question for you, the tough part for me is sort of looking at the organization and saying, okay, so do you have shiny objects syndrome where you just love value stream mapping and we're just going to keep value stream mapping because it's a great tool, it's a great thing for uncovering where the waste or problem areas are in an organization, but it also becomes this fun thing to do, to hang up paper and have post-it
Yep.
notes all over the wall. And I you know I sort of, I think there's a place and a time for that, and then you need to move on. You need to sort of say, okay, we're going to now focus on executing. Um, so, when you have organizations that want to shift from one area to another, I guess what's the deeper conversation that you have with the executives then in terms of, okay, so what is it? Is it this, or should we go focus on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. For me, I always try to advise that it's about problem solving. It's about priorities. Where is the pain in your organization? Just because it felt good and we got results, we did a value stream map, we were able to solve these problems in this part of the business. Doesn't mean, oh, let's take this and run that same playbook over here. Again, you had mentioned something along the lines of execution. That is one of the things that lacks in lean, I think, and that I've seen in the past, right? Yeah, we find out where the problems are, we find out what tools are, we need to put in place, but actually executing, getting it done, validating that it works, and really making sure that we solve that problem that's a priority for the organization is what's key. It's not that shiny object syndrome where, oh, let's just go and do it over here. And when you do that, and I've experienced this in the past, I experienced this in a downstream for a biopharmaceutical process, and this was a huge, quite a large process, large batch sizes, and we had so much success with doing 5S performance management, structured problem solving in upstream because that's where the problems were in upstream and in buffer. That, oh, we now have to do this in downstream, and uh, you could see the stress on these people's faces. They're like, we don't have problems here. We're good right now. But management and executives know we need to do the same thing. Look at all the success we had up here.
Mm.
And we have to do it everywhere. So, again, I always say it's about where your problems are, and there has to be a story that makes sense. When you come to those managers, those supervisors, those people on the floor and say, "Hey, we're going to do a 5S. We're going to do standard work. We're going to do all these things." And they're looking at you going, well, those aren't my problems right now. I've got this problem or this, and it might be something that's low hanging fruit. It might be something that doesn't need those tools. They may be humming along just fine without having visual performance management and certain things. Let's look at other parts of the business that are broken, that we need to fix, and let's focus our energy there. And it was really difficult to get buy-in from I mean, there was dozens of people that worked in this downstream process. They did everything really well, in purification to packing columns to final form. They communicated well, they had an issues log, they didn't need all of this stuff, but we were sort of forcing it down their throat because it was so successful in upstream, and they were not bought in at all. It was a completely different feel. And again, you go back to, we should have just looked at their issue log and say, what are your top three things? How can we solve these three things? Doesn't mean that they need a standard work, doesn't mean they need a 5S. Maybe it's a low hanging fruit. We solve it, they're humming. Okay. And then we move away. I think executives become infatuated with this. The whole company needs to have this same production system, and everybody needs to be aligned like an army unit. Everybody looks the same, everybody has the same. And look, if that's what somebody's vision is for lean, like the Toyota production system, that's fine. But ultimately, I think we know after seeing, some of the benefits and some of the challenges with the Toyota production system that uh, you have a limited amount of resources and a limited amount of time. You need to focus on where your key problems in your business are and put the right tools in place. Otherwise, you're going to get shiny object syndrome. You're going to go put this stuff in other places that they don't need it. You're going to waste your time and you're not going to get results. Because at the end of the day, for me, lean is about getting results. We need to see the results, we need to feel them, we need to measure them. And just because we did this great value stream map and it took 3 4 days and we have all these sticky notes and we have pictures and then everybody came together at the end and smiled and we took a picture and we sent out an email and said, oh, look at what we did, that doesn't mean we got results. It doesn't mean that's where the problem was. So again, it's I'll yeah, to be overly redundant, where the priority is, where the problems are.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I mean, just to be clear to anybody that, might watch or listen to this later, the the picture at the end of a value stream mapping or Kaizen event was to show who was accountable. So essentially, you by being in that picture, it was not just a celebration of the fact that yes, we reached this one milestone or whatever, but also, as somebody that is kind of comes back to the, this idea of sustaining the improvements over time. You could easily say, hey, look, you were there when we outlined this thing. You heard the conversation. You knew where we were going to go. You understood that. And this idea of sort of losing that traction on the back end, is anybody that essentially has been at any sort of event in the past. Yes, there is a bit of celebration that you've reached the milestone, but the work is really beginning now, because I mean, how else are you going to prove that the thing that you did has the result that you were looking for? And it's either at the end of the value stream mapping or the end of the improvement or Kaizen event that you're having. And to me, those pictures were like great evidence of, hey, look, you were standing in the team picture and you were in the room, you know, a good majority of the time as well. Let's talk a little bit about, how do we, why aren't we able to sustain, some of these improvements over time either?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. It's about execution. Everybody likes strategy. Everybody likes to go to the workshops with the value stream map and they get served lunch and, they're out of their day job, though everybody's still emailing and stuff like that. And we came up with this strategy where we think the value is and isn't what we're going to do. But ultimately, now we have to execute. And I like what you said about the picture because that is true. And that's why, I always advise my clients that after you go through strategy and strategic planning, and you've got, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do 1 2 3 and 4, and here are the people accountable for 1 2 3 and 4. They need charters, but more than that, we need a picture of their face, a professional picture of their face, and put it on that charter. I'm telling you, that is, it will, in order of magnitude, create more accountability for the execution of something when you put somebody's picture of their face in it and say it's you, right here, rather than not having that, and there just isn't that sort of connection. But ultimately, it is about execution, and that's where the hard part starts. After you go through those sessions, how do we now take this mess? It's not a mess. It's a good thing that we do in those sessions in value stream mapping, but we actually now have to fix this. We have to to make good on these things that we say that we're going to do. We have to put some of these tools in place. We have to make people accountable, responsible. We have to follow up, and we have to sustain this.
Right.
And the sustainability is the tough part too, because that's where it gets into cultural things with lean, as far as the continuous improvement cycle, and then we're always gembeing, we're always checking in, as leaders, and that's really what leaders are supposed to be doing. We're facilitating that. our subject matter experts are telling us what needs to happen. We're providing resources, we're providing scaffolding and structure, but we also have leader standard works where we're coming through once a month, once a quarter, or every couple weeks, and hey, you guys put in a 5S here, checking it out. Are you guys, doing the checklist like you said? Are you sustaining this? And if you're not, what do we need to do? How do we need to figure this out? So the execution is really, like you said, where the fun starts and where it starts to get tough. And people oftentimes look at execution as, it'll just happen of its own volition.
Magically. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
and its own magic or momentum, and that's not the case. So,
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, that's
Yeah,
how I think.
in terms of value stream mapping, the most important thing that I've seen in terms of sustaining the work afterwards is you reserve a day at the end of the value stream mapping event where that day is meant only for planning and setting the date for the very first event. When is the first improvement event going to happen? Where is it focused? Why is it focused there versus somewhere else? And all of those things are clearly defined along with the charter for that first event is already laid out by the time that you leave the room. So that
Yeah,
way, whenever you leave, it's no mystery as to how the first one's going to happen. Now, the second, third, fourth, they should already be outlined as well. I call this my multi-generational map. I mean, it's just the phrase that I've sort of come up with, based on it, which is the ranking of all of the projects that essentially equate to what's going to convert you from the current state map to the future state map. How does that happen? And essentially they get laid out in an Excel chart that has each one and when is it going to happen, what's its priority, and we talk as a team and an executive team about why did the priority work out the way that it did. So that way, whenever you leave, there's less question as to what is the top priority. Now, I have seen people sleep on it, think on it, whatever, and come back and say, hey, instead of the priority one being priority one, we think it should be two or three. And by the way, we might have to do some juggling because of vacations and other things. And look, all of that stuff happens naturally. I mean, to me, that's the part that does naturally happen, because you sort of have to work around this thing called life, no matter what happens out there. And I do feel like by having some form of a plan as you leave, then how things are going to happen. Leaving Kaizen events, I mean, like you said, it's much more follow up, right? So what metrics did we set in place? And what sort of ways did we say that we're going to check in on this thing to make sure that it's going to stay here? And that's how you really make sure that the sustainment is there. And otherwise, if you don't have it, you can almost bet that things will fall back to the way that they were, unless there were, let's say, organizational changes, environment changes, or whatever that forced kind of the new behavior into place.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
100%. And you said something, about metrics and what we're going to measure, and that's actually one of the last things I wanted to touch on today for anybody that's watching this, that just trying to keep it simple. There's 1,000 things you can measure, and it depends on what your business is. But when we think about lean, and when we think about, what are those key KPIs and things that, sort of generalize to most businesses, uh, in keeping it simple, I think about things like lead time, which is essentially lead time versus cycle time. And I think a lot of people get these things mixed up. But for anybody listening, it's as simple as lead time is when the customer asks for the thing to when the customer gets the thing. Cycle time is measuring the time of a process step or a process in between that. And then you have things like tack time, right? That you can measure. If you need to make 1,000 widgets over 1,000 hours, then every hour you need to be making a widget. 10 hours and you need to be making 10 widgets. Simple things like that I've seen really sophisticated businesses not having an understanding of. You get into things like defects. Are we measuring all defects on all of these widgets? Are we measuring, defective, binary? Like, what are we measuring? And then how are we interpreting this information? Uh, like simple things like control charts. There's simple ways to measure these things. And I often get into things like safety as well. Safety is oftentimes overlooked in lean, but if you have an unsafe process, it's going to be tremendously wasteful, because you're going to be stopping when people get hurt. You're going to be paying people when they get hurt. You're going to be demoralizing your people. It's going to take your customers longer to get the thing that they need. So, anytime a process is unsafe, it is going to be less effective. There's going to be more waste. So, you need to be measuring. When do we have near misses? When do we have incidents? Things like that. So, as I advise clients to start, how do I even start thinking about benchmarking? You
Yeah.
can just start with simple things like that. Yeah, you don't have to get into, because you and I know both as black belts and people that are lean practitioners, that you can go down the rabbit hole very far on what you want to measure as far as lean and things like that go. But just sort of keeping it simple from a quality, a waste, and a safety perspective. And you can even get into things like dollars and things when you talk about defects and the cost of goods sold, simple things. Oftentimes I feel like uh, uh, folks that want to introduce lean, they just need to keep it simple like that up
Yeah.
front to kind of understand. So, what are your thoughts?
No, I agree with all of that. I mean, I feel the same. It's look, the whatever base metrics that you need in place to make sure that things stay the way that they need to be. And you should never do anything in spite of quality, right? So and safety, right? So you should just make sure that at the end of the day that it's not about having the shortest possible process. It's about having the a safe, high quality output, that at the end of the day meets the expectations of the client. And uh, it shouldn't be one in spite of the other. But I mean, the metrics for measuring that should be very simple, and whatever they are. The only other thing that I try and encourage people to do is make sure that they're visible and they're public. This
Yes.
whole idea of having a number that you keep hidden because, oh, by the way, if this department or that department starts to understand exactly, how you're performing, you don't want them to know. Um, there's just all kinds of games that I've seen happen before where, people or leaders will say, look, I don't want the number up, whatever it is. And, I just think it's unfortunate because at the end of the day, the more that we all see exactly how things are performing, the more we can all contribute to how that output works out in the end. And if you keep it secret, then the chances of somebody else helping you are pretty infrequent. So yeah.
Yeah, visual and transparent is sort of the new, not new. It's always been there, but I think over the past handful of years, instead of me saying performance management, we need performance management. It's we need visual and transparent performance management.
Yeah.
Everybody, should be visual. We should be able to see. And you're right, that happens a lot where it's not transparent because of for whatever political reason. But yeah, no, very good points, Don.
Yeah. Well, that wraps us up for today. I appreciate you, Ron, for being on with me and having the chat. And yeah, if anybody has any questions or comments, please let us know. And also please let us know what you think of this series. If there's topics that you'd like for us to cover, we would absolutely like to cover them. And Ron, I don't know if you want to tell everybody where to find you.
Yeah, you can find me. First of all, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on propellantconsulting.com. You can find me on my LinkedIn page, Propellant Consulting. And yeah, you can email me, contact me anytime. I help clients. I'm really a strategy and execution expert, whether it's strategy, strategic planning, communicating those things throughout the organization, executing those objectives and goals, and then putting governance around performance, whether it's for the organization itself or for a particular initiative. I apply all of these tools as far as operational excellence, lean, and all of those things to make sure that we don't grind as much. right? And we can reduce a lot of those wastes and give our clients the service and products that they need. So, yeah.
Yeah. And for anybody that wants to find me, you can find me for this kind of thing at improvingprocesses.com, and also on LinkedIn. I focus a lot of my time anymore on digital media marketing, but at the same time, I'm available to help organizations implement lean, and then also, look for cost savings or reduce challenges that you might have inside of your organization. So, thanks a lot, Ron, for being with me. I appreciate it, and we'll catch everybody next time.